Today we will be discussing 1.5.A1, evidence from Pasteur's experiments that spontaneous generation of cells and organisms does not now occur on Earth. Okay, first and foremost, we should probably get into the cell theory a little bit. We've mentioned it before. The cell theory has three main premises. It states that the cell is the basic unit of life. So it's one of our criterion for, or it's a criterion for being alive. You have to tick that box. Oh, are you made of cells? Yes. Okay. All living things are composed of cells. So once again, there we go. The smallest thing that you can be and still be considered alive is a single-celled organism. And then lastly, cells come from pre-existing cells. And this means that spontaneous generation cannot occur and that cells have to come from a previous version of themselves, right, through cellular division of some kind. This one got added by Virchow because he was trying to disprove spontaneous generation, but it wasn't just Virchow. Lots of people contributed to this, which we'll see in a little bit. Yes, historically, the principle that cells only come from pre-existing cells needed to be verified because spontaneous generation had been around for thousands of years, and thus was the common belief system even by some very scholarly people like Aristotle. So anyway, let's get into it. Pasteur. His whole deal is he's given the most credit with giving the final jab, the final blow, if you will, to take down the giant that is spontaneous generation. But once again, he did not do that alone. This whole mess started. So people, when we get to the history in a second, we will find out that people have been doing this for hundreds of years at this point, trying to disprove spontaneous generation. And it took hundreds of years before this was accepted. And so, yes, Pasteur is given a lot of credit in doing this, but it was not him and him alone that did this. Okay, so in 1859, so to give you some sort of point of reference, the United States in the U.S. Civil War and Reconstruction and all of that is happening in the United States. Meanwhile, everywhere else, lots of other things are happening. Pasteur is attempting to take down spontaneous generation once and for all. And so he made the swan necks. That's what they're called, swan neck flasks. And so basically anything with this shape is also now referred to as a swan neck. He didn't just come up like, oh yes, the swan neck, and then that was it. He made lots of different types and tested them and tested them and tested them. And finally, the one that was the most efficient for experimentation purposes was the swan neck. Like you can see where some of these are not super great if you plan on heating the liquid, right? Like some of them, like this one, what is it, figure 25D. That one is not particularly well thought out, I would say. So anyway, he sterilized by boiling, and then he tested different mechanisms by both removing the swan neck and leaving the swan neck on. Biogenesis is what he referred to as a replacement for spontaneous generation, meaning that life, literally Genesis is like to birth or to begin. So life gives birth to life. Life begins life. And so what that means is in his flask, he had a nutrient broth. It's almost always chicken or beef broth of some kind, usually. He boiled it, and then he removed the swan neck flask attachment, and from the experimental one, which had the swan neck still on it, no bacteria grew, and the one that had a direct hole straight to the nutrient substance grew bacteria and mold and all kinds of stuff, and thus he was like, aha, it is not spontaneous, it is something is falling into the nutrient broth. And so he is given credit for that. All right, so describing his experiments about spontaneous generation, you boil the nutrient broth, and then the curved flask prevents the outside air and the bacteria from contaminating the nutrient broth. And so what he did find is that gunky stuff would grow in the divot of the swan neck, the low point of the swan neck, because some nutrient broth and water would evaporate, right, and kind of climb up and fall down that swan neck. And so bacteria would grow there, but bacteria itself, which he did not know about at the time, did not grow and crawl up the swan neck and back down into the nutrient broth. It would just get stuck in the glass swan neck. He boiled the other one. He took the swan neck off, and now there's just a giant hole leading to a bowl of nutrient broth, and thus bacteria loves nutrient broth, right? And so it grew in there, and he was like, aha, it is not spontaneous generation. And so here is another typed description of basically what I just said. All right. And then here is a video that is on YouTube about swan neck flasks and how they work. You are welcome when I post this to click it and watch that one. It's also from Science Show. So SciShow, and then 3 world-changing biology experiments. And there is a picture of the flask and the fluid. Basically, all Pasteur came up with is just that it is not a vital force that blows life into the air, and thus that's why we have living things. It is actually something growing or laying eggs or something like that. So I think that's pretty much all I really have to say about it. Here's a picture. There's not that much to say about it. Pasteur also went on to be known for his pasteurization techniques, which is how we do our milk now to keep it from growing bacteria as quickly. And so he's actually very advanced in his field when it comes to that later on. But for now, this is what he is the most famous for. So anyway, if you have any questions about Pasteur, please feel free to email me. Bye.